The theater organ is in trouble. A decline in enthusiasts as a result of age has left the theater organ in a yesteryear medium. Not to mention the word organ is connected to church and religion. This show aims to break down the stereotypes that have held the theater organ back for 40 years by highlighting instruments, people, and ideas that will cultivate the next generation of theater organ enthusiasts. This is From the Chambers. Welcome to the show. Tonight I'm joined by four young theater organists who are changing the landscape in performance. Tonight we have Nathan Avakian, Luke Staisiunas, Seamus Gethicker, and Richie Gregory. The theater organ's peak was in the 60s through the 80s and has been in a decline ever since. Ever more in the last 10 years. As the younger generation of artists and advocates, what will it take to survive?
I'll start. I think there's two ways to look at it. I think it's important to really understand what we mean by survive, because as I see it, there's kind of two different ways to look at the instrument. One is from a historical standpoint, and that's like the preservation side of things. And in many ways, surviving in that regard is about not being forgotten. There being enough instruments in prominent places that the general public kind of understands what a theater organ is, and it has its place in museums and history books and kind of lives on and survives in that sense. There's another sense where it survives as a contemporary musical tool that's used to create new things and is kind of ingrained in popular culture and understood in a widespread sense in the general public. I think we're already doing many of the things that are necessary to preserve it and have it survive in terms of having a legacy and being remembered, having its place in history. I think there's a lot of other things we can be doing in ways that we can be more creative to help it to survive, in the sense that it's appreciated by the general public more than it currently is.
It's interesting you say that we're doing a lot of things to help it survive now, but one of the things that happened recently in one of the forums, and I'm going to quote a lot of these things because it's sort of where the discussion has been lately. It's been a lot about changing the style of music is going to bring people to the theater organ again. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. I think the reason why we go is for what we hear, but I'm not sure that's all in what we need to be doing.
I think it's interesting. I definitely agree with playing newer music, new styles of music, but playing it in the current concert setting that we're doing right now. If you're playing new music, what does it accomplish if you still have the same people attending these concerts? You aren't bringing anyone new. So I think the days of sit down and listen to an organ for 2 hours is long gone. And I think finding other ways to showcase it. I think it's interesting that a lot of people seem to discover the organ by accident. And I feel like if we put it or show it in places where it isn't the center of attention and sort of have it known, have it be there, but not the center of attention. So people, edit that out.
Anyways, back on track. The younger generation is now the advocates. So what else do we need to do in order to survive?
I mean, at a more basic level, just letting people know that we exist. Because you go up to the average person on the street and mention a theater organ, they're going to look at you funny. I mean, every now and then you do find somebody that grew up in an area where they remember going to the summer movie series and there was play out music. I mean, last week we met a guy who was a shoemaker in St. Louis who kind of knew about the box and the organ just because he happened to stumble upon it. But if it kind of continues to be this thing where nobody knows it happens, it's not terribly well publicized. I mean, you rarely see theater organ programs as part of, concert series in cities and venues that have these things. So it doesn't matter like how fabulous the organ is or how fabulous the player is if, the person on the street has never heard of it or has zero chance to find out that it exists.
But what
I'm
is?
going to go ahead and kind of
go ahead.
go off of that. I think the theater organ is kind of really disadvantaged as well with what Luke is saying. People don't understand that it exists when it comes to, for example, a band instrument or even the piano. A lot of people have the opportunity to be exposed to it at a young age. It's just part of society and culture. So this is the clarinet when you're in elementary school, or people grew up with a piano in the house. And when it comes to the organ, especially the theater organ, there's much less of these instruments around for people in venues that make it difficult for people even to realize they exist alone. So there's a much smaller way to publicize that. And it's very difficult because of access being cut off of theaters and along that route.
But is there a way to make the theater organ something that somebody who has no information about walk off the street into the theater and see something?
I think it needs to be useful. I think about the examples of other instruments. The piano is not popular because of piano recitals, or even like cocktail music or like incidental piano music. It really is it's popular, if you could say that, because it's just so useful to so many different styles of music and applications. So I don't really know. I don't think there's any clear answers to any of these questions, like, well, how should the theater organ be used? But I do think it's important to think about that when we're integrating it into shows or when we have an opportunity to present it to the public. We should always think about ways that we can be collaborative, and if it's providing pre-show entertainment, if there's a way that it could be used in the show as well, like if the people that are producing the shows or the theater that houses it sees it as an opportunity for themselves, that they can use it and integrate it in other ways, I think ultimately that's how it will have the best chance of being appreciated and understood by the general public.
I want to go on for a moment now and talk about music selection. I mentioned earlier that seems to be a hot button topic with a lot of people chatting around in the Facebook forums. So, I look at the group, and I know that Nathan, you have really taken a new approach to how you, as a performer, are showcasing organs and showcasing your talents, especially adding all the extra stuff that you do to it now, which I think is amazing. It's a great way of tying two worlds together, and it also finds a way to modernize the repertoire, because you can't sit in the classics forever, and everyone knows that. And I think there's a group of people that will always love the classics and never like the modern music, and that's been true with everything from beginning of music till right now. So let's talk about how, as performers, especially younger performers, everyone is adapting their repertoire, because I believe you guys are spanning an enormous range from the beginning of theater organ to whatever's out there right now.
I think it's definitely important to know your audience. If in a normal concert setting, as we know now, playing the regular stuff is fine, but as we go out and find new ways, we definitely need to play music that certainly is newer, but I don't think that always has to be the case. I think the keyword is relevant. We're occasionally you'll hear a song that becomes popular all of a sudden today that was written in the 50s or 60s with people doing new covers and stuff. And I think relevance is the key word here. And not to stray totally off topic, but going back to what Nathan was saying, collaboration is a big thing that I think that we need to do. And looking back at the 2019, it was 2019 in Rochester, the program Nathan did, I feel, he definitely doesn't do the usual stuff, which I love. And I think that the concert itself was amazing. The presentation was great. There were lights going everywhere. It was incredible. And I feel like if we collaborate with other musicians, like I was thinking the whole time, imagine if Nathan had an actual rock ensemble with all the lights and everything. I feel like if you put the general public in there and did that, the reception would be amazing. And
well, that is a good point, because there is a certain showmanship. I mean, you go back to, for me, you go back to Virgil Fox, and Virgil Fox knew how to bring a crowd in. I don't know what he did, how they came to follow him the way they did, but when you think about it, Virgil was sort of the beginning of the major show. Fast forward to now, Nathan, I know you're great, but I don't think you have a following like Virgil Fox did. But I mean, maybe if you added a little more sequence to it, I don't know how you want to do it, but you also have, Cameron Carpenter. He is doing things his own way, and that seems to be working pretty well. But going back to what you said, the whole spectacle of a concert, that could be a way that changes everything. But, at the same time, you're only one performer. And I know Nathan would program a show in a heartbeat, but he would also have to work on his own program for his show. So there's also that logistic side of that too. But I think there is something to be said about that. And I wonder if that's something that future conventions might be able to adapt to in a way, sort of make it a little more.
A really good thing to think about when we're talking about choosing music is, I can't remember who said it just now, but knowing your audience is really important. But it's also really important to like the first person that you should be playing music for as an artist is yourself. And, I don't think any artist should play music that they're not passionate about just because that's what the audience expects. And I think that's a good way to cater to the audience that currently exists, but it's not going to be a good way to broaden that audience going forward. So while I think it's important to play popular music to generate interest, it's not why I play music. Just in terms of music, I don't do what I do specifically to promote the medium or help the reputation of the theater organ. I do it because that's just genuinely the type of music that I want to create. And I think the artists that are really strong, and all three of you are also like really strong doing the type of music that you enjoy. I think if we don't let the audience expectation completely dictate everything that we do, we'll end up with a wider variety of music, and we'll see even more passion and connection from the artists, which can only be a good thing.
Nathan, I'm curious. I just wanted to ask, did you start off by playing the style that you do now, or did you start with an older style and you sort of merged, I want to try this, and you went and tried that? How did you get to where you are now?
Kind of. I got interested from the Portland Organ Grinder restaurant. So I went there when I was like 4 years old or something, and just heard Star Wars and Disney music and mostly contemporary music. And so I was fascinated with the instrument, but I was also hearing music that was relevant. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that there was actually like a whole industry around with people that were playing older music and had other older connections with the instrument. So the type of music that I'm interested in hasn't really changed that much. Like, it's always been contemporary. But I did, like, when I was taking lessons, I did trying to be as versatile as possible. I would do, classical music, and I would pick some older standards. And over time, I just realized that my audiences weren't responding to those in the same way, and I wasn't as passionate about playing them. So I haven't learned a new march in a long time, or a new waltz, because it just hasn't really interested me. And I thought, as long as what I'm doing is successful in some way, I really only want to do the things that really intrigue me. So hopefully that doesn't bite me in the butt. for now, I think it's been fulfilling.
And that really goes back to what you were saying about, you want to put on a program that you would want to listen to. You want to play music that you enjoy playing. When you do the Bohemian Rhapsody, you're doing that because that's the one you like to do. You're not doing it because it's something you think is going to draw everybody in. You're like, this is my song, I want to play this.
Right. I think that even if you play older music, I think if you play it with that sort of feeling and mentality that, this is what I most want to do, that absolutely comes through to an audience. I would hate to see the theater organ like succeed or survive and evolve into this thing where the people that are playing it don't really care about the music that much. I think that maybe this is going to come out sounding horrible, and I don't think I mean it that way, but if the organ died because the artists only played what they were really passionate about, and that just didn't resonate with people, then so be it. That was the life of the instrument, and that's fine. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. That's not my prediction, but I think it's better if we're all authentic and really being honest about our relationships with the instrument and the things that we're passionate about. And I have faith, I guess, that will come through and that will ultimately be successful.
Richie or Luke, thoughts on repertoire?
I mean, it definitely is a very personal thing for each artist. And I think audiences know that and kind of come to expect, this artist is going to play this kind of music because they connect with. And it's one of those things where you can definitely tell that when an artist has a personal connection to the music, that they're then able to make a personal connection to the audience. And that's kind of the whole point of a live performance, in my opinion, is that, you feel that connection to the artist because they're sharing what's meaningful, personal to them with you. And that kind of the beauty of it is that everybody has different preferences and kind of different passions. And that's, what makes the instrument interesting, is that 4 people playing the console, playing the music that they like, will make the instrument sound like 4 different instruments. And it's that's always the thing that impresses me about what is essentially a box of whistles and some drums. The artist on the bench can totally transform it into something that somebody else can't.
I think that there's a lot of versatility and stuff you can do with the theater organ, which I'm definitely interested in doing. I think that, like what Nathan is doing, you got to collaborate with other sources like drum tracks or other musicians that achieve other things, is what Nathan wants to do and what I can see myself doing in the future, just because that's what I like to do. There's a lot that I want to do on the organ, but on today's standards of today's music, you just can't do it with just the organ alone. You have to collaborate with other sources to make that possible. And I think that's a very important route for musicians to consider if they want to take contemporary music and put it on the organ going forward in the future.
What would your ideal second instrument be to accompany with the organ, or have the organ accompany?
Well, I think that drum set, definitely, that's not necessarily a melodical instrument, but that adds a lot of rhythmic backbeat, I didn't say that correctly, and subdivision, which you can't get with just doing your second touch accompaniment with the percussion on the organ, because it's nice to have your counterpoint melody and second touch every now and then, but then you can't do the offbeat 2 and 4 with the percussions. That's the limitation of the instrument. So I think that drum set would definitely be my first go-to for collaboration, going further with other instrumentalists.
I get it when I do rhythm tracks, when I get opposition or negative feedback from it, many times it's because people know enough to know that the organ has percussions, and so they'll say, you know, why didn't you use the organ percussions, as if it has somehow lessened the overall musical quality because I didn't exclusively use the organ. But
there's only so much the organ can do. It's all dependent on what you're hitting at the right time.
But a sampled drum set is going to sound much better on Bohemian Rhapsody than the Wurlitzer bass drum and tap cymbal.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you know, not to mention that there's going to be a delay in like the acoustics of the room, and it's going to be, and I am going to have to tie up my entire accompaniment manual to do one rhythmic thing, you know, and then I lose half.
You say that because when you look at places like Mesa, you know, you have a rhythm unit controlling the organ and nobody says anything.
Right. Well,
as soon as you add electric or something else to the instrument, God forbid, you ruin the entire setting for the evening.
I think there are people who would, who would prefer that like organ stop didn't have the traps. Like, I think it's like a spectrum, you know, and there's people that don't want any additions to it, that just want things to be preserved as original installations. And then there's, like you're saying, there's people that would accept it if it was something that still was contained within the instrument, if the instrument was producing the sound. I think that's a whole nother discussion, but I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
What people prioritize when they listen to organ music, but what makes the performance credible, I guess.
So I want to move on to sort of a trend that we're seeing a lot of, and that's home organs. There's been a lot of acquiring and transporting of instruments across the country, moving from one place to another, and mostly not into theaters. Though I would say that there have been a handful of theaters that have been advertising that they're receiving theater organs back into the space. I think the Warner Theater in Pennsylvania, up in Erie, Pennsylvania, just announced that will be going in this year in time for the symphony, which I think is great news. But do you think that there needs to be a better push to try and get instruments back into theaters and less into private residences?
Yes and no. Because, I mean, there are the people who, you know, they see an old movie theater in a town, they see that it's getting fixed, and they kind of get on this horse of, oh, they must have a pipe organ installed in the chambers. But there are some venues for which they just don't need one. Because, you know, a lot of these places, if it's going to be a rock house, they don't need to give up, you know, space for money making with either lights or seats or whatever, so that way the theater organ club can have their concerts twice a year. But at the same time, if it's a hall that's going to sort of be a multi-purpose venue where they capability of showing silent films, or there's chances for the organ to play with the orchestra, you know, choirs, bands, whatever, then sure, then there's a case to be made.
I think what's important is that, first and foremost, there's a lot of these instruments that, if it wasn't for people putting them in their house or wherever they're currently stored at, they'd be in the trash. So we have to acknowledge that. We got to be thankful that these people have gone out of their way to have the instruments in their house. They're paying huge sums amount of money per month to keep them in safety. I think this also goes back to the first question on how do you make the organ relevant in society. Going to what Luke just said, well, what if theaters, we worked with theaters to make the organ more of a relevant instrument, not as a solo instrument, but sort of part of the show, a collaboration instrument. That would require putting more instruments back in theaters, but making them multi-purpose rather than just, sitting for a concert twice a year, which is a huge, another social circle conversation that would have to happen. How do we achieve this with the theater that it will be going into? But that would be a huge advantage as far as I'm going back into. But again, it just depends on what the theater is planning on doing. I think the question there would be, how do you work with a theater to have them want to put an instrument in and use it regularly?
What about the argument of restoring a full organ from an original installation into a new theater versus just transplanting say an Allen organ? Is the argument, well, it's an organ, but is there something lost by not bringing in the full mechanics of an organ?
Definitely. Sure, a pipe organ takes up quite a bit of space and resources, but it's a real instrument. It's, wind blowing through pipes, creating acoustic sounds, and all those sounds in the chamber interacting with one another, and literally filling a space with air versus a speaker, which can never do the same thing. And it becomes sort of readily apparent when you're trying to use an organ for something like accompanying a symphony or playing walk-in music, where you have to produce a large volume of sound. And you can sit in the room and you can actually feel a pipe organ, where with an electronic that fades away.
I agree with that. I also think that in many cases, there's probably venues that that may be open to having an instrument, but it's not just it's not practical anymore because of the purpose of the venue to have a pipe organ, or maybe there's not enough people to properly install it and maintain it, and it's going to be too big of an expense. And I'd rather see digital organs go into those places instead of no instrument. So I think it's worthwhile always to have a conversation about it and figure out what the needs of the venue are. And obviously the more genuine pipe organs, the better. But I think there's definitely a place for both kinds of instruments.
And I look at what NYTOS, New York Theater Organ Society, is doing. They have a touring Allen organ that they're able to take and put into a venue that never would have been able to support a theater organ. For example, the Poughkeepsie Galleria Mall. Nathan, you've played there. You know what it's like to set up a whole instrument in a space that shouldn't have an organ, but suddenly really should have an organ in it.
Well, I think every space should have an organ.
Well, absolutely. I mean, don't forget, I'm trying to get an organ in the new Penn Station, the Moynihan train station. So I'm not counting anything out yet.
Well, there's a history of that too. I think I know NYTOS had wanted at one point to do Grand Central Station also. And there's some history there, and I can't remember all the specifics of it, but there used to be an organist.
There was, yes. And I've tried to dig that up.
Yeah, but I think that'd be great. And I actually think that putting organs in locations where they would never normally be, where you don't expect them to be, is one of the best ways to reach a wider audience. That Galleria event that I do, which for people that don't know is basically like 2 weeks of organ music in a shopping mall, and there's a roster of organists. Seamus has done this too. And so you get a lot of people who would never otherwise have learned about it or thought to listen to an organ. who can at least, hear it while they're shopping or stop and listen, and people can really get out of it whatever they want. They can just pass by, and if they don't want to listen to it, they don't have to. It's not like somebody dragged them along to an organ concert.
And going back to
but if you enjoy it,
yeah,
as long as you want.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier about how do we grab people in the now moment, the whole social media side of things is exactly why having organs in unusual spaces works, because you see it and you want to share it, and God willing, they're sharing it, and that may bring more people into the mall, for example. Oh, look at this thing. That's unusual. I'm going to go check it out. And that generates interest in one way or another. It's usually hard to get something theater organ trending, I'd say. I don't know how well it does when you hashtag theater organ, but we try. I think we all put it on every one of our posts that we share about it. So it's not like it hasn't worked yet, but we're still trying.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great, coming back to the question of theater installations. Of course, that's where the organ found its biggest success, but there's so many other places that organs could go. So I think it's really important. I don't think that the future of the theater organ is likely going to be primarily in theaters. I think it's going to be digital in many ways, and I think it's going to be integrated into our public life in other ways. And music in public spaces is one of them.
I think there's an entire conversation about music in public spaces that we could do a whole show on. We all have that experience now, so I think that's a really good show idea that we could probably do later down the road.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting talking about putting organs in public spaces. I'm going to sound kind of like Cameron Carpenter here. I think digital organs in some ways can be superior, especially when thinking about installations and the circumstances they're under. I think it's important to remember, or at least I think, that the general public doesn't really care if it's digital or pipe. Of course, us theater people, people are always arguing over that and what have you. But in some places where, say, there's room to put, I don't know, a 10-rank Wurlitzer, people might be angry at me for this, but I would rather see, if you're looking to do full-on concerts and full concert season and doing big productions, I would rather see and personally play a really nice digital instrument with a lot of resources than a 10-rank Wurlitzer that's just kind of wheezing along. And I feel like I feel like the audience just doesn't really care if it's digital or not. And especially with today's technology, most of them probably can't even tell the difference.
Yeah, and I think that, using your example of a 10-rank Wurlitzer versus a much larger digital, totally depends on the goal of the venue that it's in, or the purpose that it's going to serve in that place. Because I totally understand the need to preserve pipe organs and preserve original installations and not lose that history. And I also think that they're can produce amazing music, as they always have. But yeah, if you have the opportunity with an organ that's in a venue somewhere to reach thousands or tens of thousands of people, and you need to have artists be able to come in and quickly produce interesting registrations or have varied programs, then maybe a digital instrument is going to be more beneficial there. It just completely depends on the type of programming and what the limitations and wants and needs of the venue are.
And sometimes got me thinking. There are some theaters that use their instruments, and they're great instruments, and it's all a great situation. But there are some others, they have a great instrument, but it just doesn't get used. And in that situation, and I should say, there's nothing wrong with a theater that doesn't want and doesn't have an organ. They have much bigger and better things to deal with. So in situations like that, where an organ might be interesting, but it might not be used so much, I think a digital is a good thing to put there.
One of the views I have is, and this is from being in a church, we're currently talking about putting a new instrument in. And along the way of conversation, somebody said, well, it's not a pipe organ. Why do we need a digital organ? Why do we need an organ at all if we don't have a pipe organ? They didn't understand that one of the things of the organ is that it's an actual instrument that people passionately make music on, and that there's still multiple possibilities to go forward with. And I can see that stretching over to the theater spectrum as well, where if you have a person who goes, well, it doesn't have pipes, we don't need to put a fake instrument in here if there's no pipes, because it's not the authentic 20s experience, just because they don't understand the musicality of having an actual instrument. There are people like all four of us and beyond who actually passionately play it like a real instrument. They see it more as just something to replicate the past but be fake, rather than a real passionate instrument.
Yeah, but isn't that better than the audience not even knowing about that past at all? Like, I just feel like it's so much better if you have the opportunity to engage people with that type of instrument. It's only going to help, because the history is there. The legacy is already there of the pipe organ. And the only way that really is threatened is if nobody even knows enough to look for it.
Important to express that there's a lot of possibilities with the instrument. There's a lot of versatility. There's a lot of musicianship that can go on there. There's a passion for this instrument still, but it's just a question of going back to, well, how do we, expose that to people? How do we introduce people to it? Go, hi, we're organists. This is what we do. It's just a whole loop conversation.
Yeah, I mean, what's been my only live gig as of recently, besides church, is a monthly silent film series at this little art house theater in Oklahoma City, where I think they had a Robert Morton back in the 20s, and they were offered a Wurlitzer, but the feasibility study came back, and understandably, they didn't want to lose most of their stage space for something they use once a month. So they had an old electronic donated, which is at least meant that they could see a live person playing a silent film, live, and kind of get to experience that. And it's mostly been, older folks who remember, I guess, when they did silent films at the Civic Center back in the 50s and 60s, but they bring their kids along and they kind of get to experience, real art in real life.
It's really interesting to hear you guys talk about this, because this is why I wanted to do this show in the first place. I wanted to hear from what I'm considering the younger generation, the next generation, those who are going to pick up what was started in the earlier days and carry it on for the next generations to come. And the ideas that you guys are bringing are wonderful, and I've loved every minute of this. So the pandemic locked down everyone at home and shut the theaters, and we really didn't have a chance to gather for a convention this year, or last year rather. A lot of artists took to YouTube and Facebook. Mark Herman is out every other week, it seems, at a new venue putting on a show. Nathan, you were over at the Filippo Estate doing your performances there with everyone else. And the question I have for the group is, have we tapped into a new market for promoting the theater organ through live stream and digital events?
Definitely, because it.
Yes.
Oh, you can.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Definitely, because it kind of comes back to that whole thing of we can't share what we are passionate about if people don't know it exists. And with YouTube and things, with Mark's performances getting tens of thousands of views, they get kind of promoted and people can share them around, and people get sort of, I guess, we've all experienced where we heard an organ somewhere and got hooked. And even if people aren't, going out to making their parents drive them to thrift stores to buy organ records, they'll at least know that it's a thing. And if they enjoy the YouTube concerts, they might come back for another one or share it with their family and friends.
Yeah, I think obviously, digital platforms are the future of so many different industries, and we shouldn't be, obviously, a pipe organ is an acoustic instrument and it should be experienced in person, but we would be doing ourselves a huge disservice if we didn't hop on the bandwagon that everybody else is. And I think there's so much to be gained from digital performances. Right, I've mostly been seeing concerts like 30 minutes to 2 hours in length, and I hope that we use the skills that we've built as an industry or as a collection of organizations that are promoting this instrument to produce more content like this and a wider variety of content, shorter videos that maybe have a better chance of going viral, more, like we talked about before, more collaborative things with other artists that already have followings on social media. I'm really happy to see that so many organ groups have done this successfully and produced really nice looking presentations that will reach an audience that's much larger than we ever could do in person.
Do you think that concerts should no longer just be limited to their venues? Do you think that maybe there should be a digital ticket involved with it as well?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think so. Like, if you think about it, younger people, I don't know, our age up through 50 or whatever, they don't really go out for events unless it's like, a big pop concert in a big stadium. And so they aren't really going to be interested in going out, sit for 2 hours and, listen. But if they can just tune in from their home, or later on, like if it's recorded, they can go back and watch it. I think that's a real possibility. And I hope that what's being done now during the pandemic continues, and that more presenters sort of followed this way that Dickinson, for example, was doing it. Because I think it's working, and I think it can really grow a lot more.
And I don't think it's going to negatively affect ticket sales. I think you're going to reach larger audiences that might not otherwise be there to see the show in person. For example, Dickinson. I don't think a lot of people were flying from California to come see concerts. I'm sure maybe if it was diehards and a big name, they would be out there. But for the most part, I think having a online option, and when you make it exclusive and not just throwaways, it opens up a whole new market for getting people to get eyeballs on something and really take part in it.
Yeah, and I think many of the groups that produce these performances now are have a mission to primarily just promote and educate about the instrument. And so even if it is not as financially lucrative to do digital presentations, I still think that it has the potential to further the mission much more than just doing live performances does.
So with everything we've talked about tonight, the big question on my mind and probably on a lot of other people's minds is, what does the future hold? And as my panelist, you've really brought a lot to the whole conversation tonight. And I thank you all for being here, especially through this very first episode, which has, a few bumps along the way, but it's still a good start to the conversation. So starting off with Nathan, what do you see the future holding for the theater organ?
That's a really big question. And in short, I see a lot of possibilities, and I don't want to make any predictions because I think we kind of have to carve our own path here. So I can tell you based on what people are doing and what's working, what I hope to see is that we really broaden our reach through digital platforms, and continue to produce really creative, collaborative performances where artists are really pursuing their own unique musical interests and passions and using the theater organ as more of a tool to assist in the creation of their musical ideas, rather than continuing to do the same types of presentations for the same audiences that we've been doing, which we all know and love, but aren't necessarily reaching as wide an audience as we'd like.
Luke?
I would think sort of two big things. One being a lot more silent film accompaniment now that silent movies are really becoming part of the canon of study for film enthusiasts, and what better way to make the theater organ relevant than kind of getting back to what it was built for. And the other big thing would be collaborating with other musical groups. There are people advocating for symphony orchestras, concert bands, and kind of having those as part of people's general consciousness of things they can go to.
Seamus?
Sort of echoing what Nathan said and what Luke said, I hope to see collaboration, and I hope to see more enthusiasm just from the theater organ world as a whole. It's important to remember that we're all big fish in a very small pond, and I think we should all really just make an effort and come together and just do our best to promote it and find new ways to do it.
But I'm also going to say that something to consider, and this is, I don't want to be morbid, but we are the next generation. And with that said, the generations of the past aren't going to be around forever. They are going to cycle out, and then we're going to become the older generation. And that will give us a chance to amend what we sort of discussed here about how we want to do things differently, about how we want to try new stuff. And that will give us more freedom, this is a weird topic to phrase, but it will give us more of a palette to go ahead and go forward and do more collaboration and hold more contemporary aspects.
These are all great outlooks for the theater organ, and I have to thank my panel tonight for being with me. You guys really have started the conversation that needed to be had years ago that nobody ever thought to have. And I really hope that through this program, we're able to really focus on how the theater organ is going to survive 5, 10, and another 50 years from now. So I have to thank Nathan, Luke, Seamus, and Richie for a great conversation tonight and for your time and everything. Thanks for joining us on From the Chambers. I'm Dan Rousseau. Hope to see you on the next episode.